Angelo's ideas or Angelo's experiences. That same impulse that will confront Angelo with some earth-shaking idea that makes me move out of my comfort zone, to move into a higher level of consciousness. That same impulse is the same impulse that happened 14 billion years ago that created this universe. Isn't that interesting? If that's so, then we're part of this tremendous explosion, you might say, the Big Bang itself. That the Big Bang is still going on, and it's going on within each of us, that we're always becoming something. And that for us to survive in this world of form and be all that we can be as physical beings occupying, as spiritual beings occupying bodies, that we must go through those impulses that are presented to us all the time. And so you might say, well, I don't know if I agree or not agree. Well, I have some proof here. On March of 2014, it was in the Fresno Bee, and the caption was, it was kind of interesting, ripples of Big Bang found in the ancient light. Bob's going to like this, and he'll have to explain it to you. But the researchers from Stanford, from the Smithsonian, from the California Tech, from Stanford were getting together, and they were studying this whole idea of the Big Bang, and they discovered one thing, it's in the article here, that microwave light that occurred 14 billion years ago is still there, and it's still expanding, and we are part of that expansion. So when we start looking at this idea of the divine order, what are we? We were there before the beginning, and we're here right now. And we're still participating in this ever-expanding universe that we call, well, the world. That's who we are. And so our participation is pretty crucial. We see this becoming all the time, all around us. It's amazing. You can't open up a newspaper and see. And the thing that kind of drives you kind of bonkers in a way is that if we all have life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness, and I'm looking at news reports, and I'm looking at the bitterness and the uncompromising attitudes of the people we send to take care of things, and we look at the wars and all that's going on, you kind of think, my gosh, are there a lot of people walking the planet who don't have the faintest idea of how to make life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness a reality in their lives? What's going on here? And so the question is that part of the divine order? Think about it. Or is there another part of the divine order? The divine order can be all things to all of us. Yes, that's part of the divine order. We may want to like it or disbelieve it or not, that's okay. We may say, I don't know why there's so much atrocity in the world. And how could that be in a divine order? Because there's an impulse that's going on, and we're not even aware of it. It's part of this becoming that we're talking about from the Big Bang. That's pushing us into a higher level of consciousness, making us more aware of our spirituality. And when we see a country that's taking from others, that's being very negative towards people, and we can say, well, what is all that about? It's part of the divine order. I know it sounds heretic, that I'm being a heretic on this, but it's all part of that. Because this idea of the divine works in many ways. We have the directive, the objective part that where we put into mind what exactly we want to experience. And we have a subjective, it's got it in action, responding and saying yes, yes, yes. When you've got a whole culture, a culture of taking and abusing, what is that all about? I know I'm stepping across the border here when it comes to understanding, but the idea is it's all in divine order, whether we like it or not. And it's a response of spirit. It's the impulse of spirit itself, learning about itself through each of us, and actually expressing itself as we direct it to express. You see, the world that we're living in, maybe it is a dream. Ken Wilber says that every night we go home, we go to sleep, and we go to sleep, and we go deep into it, We release the physical, but then we go home. We go home. We go into deep sleep. And he says a day will come when we grow in consciousness that we will realize that this is a dream as well. That we're all living a dream. And that we are wonderful spiritual entities here experiencing what it's like to live in a temporary finite body. What it's like to function in a limited finite world. It's God experiencing Himself through Angelo, through each one of us. We're learning and we're growing. And this takes on a new, when we start realizing that everything that happens to me is good for me, then our whole life changes. I like to use Zona, the master teacher, the Zen master, her name is Zona. And we've talked about Zona. But Zona, she was well known throughout the universe. And she had one mantra that she used, that I use all the time. And what it is I'm grateful for everything. I have no complaints. I am grateful for everything. I have no complaints. You know, if we can be grateful for everything and not put a label on what's happening, then we realize, hey, these are spiritual impulses that's in our life to take us to a different level of consciousness so we can learn more about ourselves as spiritual. And so there's a lot of stories that's going on. We see the outpicturing of this divine loving energy all the time. I picked up the paper and looked at the news just this last week. This guy is driving along the freeway, has an accident. And this man is trapped in his burning vehicle. Trapped. I mean, now there's cameras all over the place. You can see an accident happening while it's happening. And what happens is this divine energy that's not bound by the physical, that supersedes all that, transcends the physical. This guy stops, runs over to the car, and the guy's trapped inside and tries to open the door, won't open. So he tears the door off the car using superhuman strength, bending the frame, tearing the steel hinges off the door. And he thought, God, how did I do that? I wasn't even thinking. It's that divine energy that's unlimited, that's not under the domain of the physical, that actually created the physical, that's operating. So a few years ago, we mentioned about Emerson Institute. We had a student that was doing all of his work on the computer, on the internet. And what's so big deal about that? The guy's blind. He's blind. He was using a computer that speaks to him. His name is Michael. It's awesome. We see this every day. And so when we start looking at this, we can say, no, I reject that. I reject the fact that we're part of this big boom that happened 14 billion years ago, that is still expressing in my life, that I'm dealing with it right here, right now, that presents to me all these situations that's driving me to transcend the human activities and to realize the good that I am. And so we can say yes to that or no. We have choices. Does it really matter what we think? No. We can say, no, in my belief system, the universe started 4,000 years ago. Even though science could prove otherwise, that's what I believe. And that's fine. There's a guy named, he's a spiritual teacher. I love this guy. His name is Emil. And of course, I won't be able to find his notes. But Emil said this, and I can just briefly say what he said was, he said, he who floats with the current, who does not guide himself to higher principles, who has no idea, no conviction, such a person is a mere article of the world's furniture. That's the status quo. If we want to say, I don't believe any of that nonsense, and I'm not part of the Big Bang, how kind of it? How about 14 billion? If it happened at all, it probably did. Well, then I'm part of the world's furniture. A thing moved instead of a living, moving being. An echo, not a voice. Such a person has no inner life, is a slave of his surroundings, as a barometer is the obedient servant of the air around us, as a weather vane is a servant of the wind itself. We can say no and keep the status quo and complain our way through this life experiences. Does it make a difference? Not really. Life goes on. Or we can say yes to it. And we can say yes and yes. I am part of that. I'm going to accept Zona as my mentor and my master. And everything that happens to me contributes to me. I'm grateful for it all. I have no complaints. I want to end with a Tony Campola. I love Tony Campola. He's a sociologist, a professor. And what happened to Tony changed his whole life. And he didn't expect it. What happens is he's giving a lecture in a religious school in the Midwest. And he's giving this lecture, and this lady, on the second day, he's got all these kids that are on sociology. This lady comes up and looks him in the eye, and she said, my gosh, what is, she says, can I help you? She said, God told me to come here. She was carrying a baby that had braces and his legs were out of shape. God told me to come here. And he thought, my gosh, if God told her to come here, why didn't he let me know? That's what he thought. And, well, what do you expect from me? And all the kids are out there. She said, God said you were going to heal my child. He says, I'm not a healer. I didn't know nothing about healings. I'm a sociology professor. He said, look at my bald head. If I were healing, I'd have hair. And she says, no, God told me. She would not go away. God told me that you would heal my son. And the kids by now, they're all having fun. They're seeing this professor in such dire straits, suffering. And they're laughing. The door opens and in comes the chaplain of this religious school. And he sees what's going on. He comes up to the stage and he says, can I help you, Tony? What's going on here? He said, this lady wants me to heal her kid. I'm not a healer. He says, do you want some help? He says, please. He said, well, we're gonna help you. The chaplain gets on the platform and he says, anyone in this audience who feels that this child cannot be healed, I want you to leave now. If you're not sincere about knowing without a doubt that the legs of this child will be cured with prayer, I want you to leave now. And what happens? They all leave except 5 Pentecostal students. In the meantime, they're in the audience. They're doing their thing, waving their arms, and they're in tongues, praying in tongues and doing things. And then Tony said, well, what do we do next? She said, we're going to take the person into the back room, to the kitchen, and we're going to anoint the child with oil. What kind of oil? Del Monte. You gotta be kidding, that's a cooking oil. He said, listen, if you have a better idea, you tell me. The good book in James says that if someone needs healing in your church, that the elder should anoint the child at the head with oil and pray and put hands on. And that's what we're going to do. Do you have a better idea? No. So they go in there, and of course, the Pentecostal students are doing their thing and speaking in tongues, and the chaplain's pouring Del Monte oil over this baby's head, and everybody's praying and laying hands on. 3 years later, now this is the evolution of kindness for a man who was a skeptic, who was pretty much irritated. 3 years later, he's giving another talk, and this woman comes up with the child in the hand. She says, do you remember me? And he says, yes. Well, we're here to thank you. You healed my son. And I want to thank you. Isn't that cool? Let's clap for that, because that's good. And we can say, yes, we are an extraordinary being. That's who we are. And within ourselves is this tremendous dynamic energy of love itself. And then when we play our highest part, we become that life form of God on earth, experiencing the human drama. And it's all good, and it's all God. And say it loud and clear. And so it is.